My mother-in-law was a brilliant woman, but she was tyrannical in a very sweet way. 6 weeks after my first son was born, the Chinese servant, the cook and groundskeeper and everything, couldn't stand the hullabaloo anymore, I guess. And my mother-in-law had become very nervous, and she'd go in the kitchen and scold him, and the baby cried a lot. And I'd find old Charlie standing at the baby buggy, rocking the baby buggy violently, and that worried me. And so one day my mother-in-law went into the kitchen to castigate Charlie for something, I don't know what, and he picked up a knife and said, "Get out of my kitchen, you! Get out of my kitchen! You talk, talk, talk all the time! Get out of my kitchen!" And my mother-in-law came into the living room where I was, white-faced, and she said, "Charlie threatened me with a butcher knife." So I rushed to the telephone and called my husband, and he came home and went in and talked quietly to Charlie. Charlie was a real old-line Chinese cook. She'd had him for years, and he was wonderful. And so Charlie decided he was going back to China and die with his ancestors. So Charlie left. So my mother-in-law tried to get help, and it was very difficult to get household help at that time. So she decided we'd do without help, and she'd teach me to keep house and cook. And it was pretty awful. But she had such a sweet way with her. She'd go around the house with a little broom and brush up little piles of dust, and then she'd say, "Wouldn't you like to dust the dining room? Wouldn't you like to sweep up these little piles of dirt?" And I felt like saying, "No, I wouldn't like to do anything." But I didn't. I would go around and sweep them up, and then she was going to teach me to cook. I could cook, but I wasn't a gourmet cook. So one day she was showing me how to make gravy. My husband loved gravy with his roast. And I was stirring the gravy, and she came and peered over my shoulder, and she said, "You're stirring it the wrong way." Well, I'd never heard there was a wrong way to stir gravy, but that gives you a little insight. If I fixed a bouquet, she didn't want those flowers picked. Or I'd used the wrong container. That was something she didn't use. It was very choice and wasn't to be used. And in our house, we used everything. And so you can see that for a 20-year-old with a new baby, it was pretty difficult. And then very shortly, the little girl came, and she was a joy, a little bundle of sunshine, and no trouble at all. But in the meantime, the burdens were picking up, and when I was pregnant with the third child, my mother-in-law had bought a new car. And by that time, her sister had moved to La Jolla and was building a new house. And my mother-in-law wanted to go down to La Jolla and see her sister and her granddaughter, her niece. So it was arranged that my husband and she would take a 2-week vacation and go to La Jolla. So the plans were all made, and here was Helen with 2 little babies in this house. And at that time I was a little scared to be alone. And my mother-in-law mapped out everything, wrote out everything I was to do while they were gone, and we didn't have this garden. This was just kind of a wasteland back here, but the front yard was a garden. But there wasn't much to do in the blackberry. Lots of blackberry vines, and this one fruit tree was here and an apricot tree, but you didn't have to do anything back here. So I was told to bring in the mail and to how I was to keep the house and this and that, and I listened to all of it. And the day they left on their little trip, I put my little boy and my little girl in my Lloyd Loom baby buggy and walked out to my mother's and said, "I'm not going to stay in that house alone." And my mother got in her big Studebaker and came into town, picked up the baby's clothes and the things we needed, And I didn't come in and pick up the mail, and I didn't water the garden, and I didn't come near this place for 2 weeks. And I had a wonderful time, and the children had a marvelous time out there in the country with their little... My youngest brother was only 4 years older than my son, and my youngest sister was only 8 years older, so it was just wonderful. And one night I got a telephone call, and my husband called me, and he said, "Oh, you're out here." They'd come home, and they'd found the grass kind of dry, and the mail piled up. He said, "Have you been out to your mother's long?" And I said, "Yes, for 2 weeks." And he said, "Well, I'll come out and get you." And so he came out, and I refused to come home. And that went on for several days. So finally he came out one day and he said, "Are you leaving me?" And I said, "No, Hilliard, I'm leaving your mother." So there was a great deal of consternation. Of course, she was very angry. And by that time, Hilliard and Pudge, my 2 little children, had whooping cough. And my brothers and sisters had whooping cough, and so my children had got it. And I was pregnant. So my mother-in-law picked up and went up to the ranch at Winters and stayed with my husband's youngest brother, who was a bachelor and on the farm there. And my husband came out and got me, and we went looking for a lot to build on. So we built a house. She didn't forgive me for about a year. She stayed away that whole year we were building, and the children had whooping cough and so on and so forth. But I didn't leave my husband. People said, "You left Hilliard once?" I said, "No, I never left Hilliard. I left his mother," which I did.